Oh, excuse me. Um, welcome to our meeting tonight. It's so nice to see all of you here. We have a surprise visitor, Keith Perry, our state senator, is here. There was a slight mix-up which happened, I think, many months ago, but he's here, and so our speaker, Ryan, has agreed to let Keith speak for a few minutes to give us a legislative update, and then our invited guest, Ryan Smart, will speak to us about how to correspond with your legislator. It all fits together. Okay, so welcome. I want to thank our membership chair, Barb Francis, who sits back there and does a wonderful job of informing people, and Alice Gridley, who is out in the hallway, who has petitions if you're interested in signing a petition for the league, and the local league president, Janice Geary, is also here. So it's just like a whole bunch of good people. So welcome.
Do I need a microphone? Okay. We'll use a microphone. Oh, okay. You're recording it too. Okay, good. Well, good evening. I wasn't really invited, but I thought I'd show up. So I am now. Thank you. So for people who don't know me, my name is Keith Perry, the state senator, District 9, which is about half of Alachua County, all of Marion County, all of Levy County. This is going into my 14th year in the legislature. I served 6 years in the State House, and this is my 8th year in the Florida Senate, and it is my last year. My penance is up, and we'll let somebody else take over that position. So I thought, if just for a few minutes, I'll just share, and if you have any questions, then I'll let you get on to your speaker. Fortunate enough to chair Education Appropriations. In the House, there's two different appropriations committees for education. We have a K through 12, and then we have a higher ed. In the Senate, we have less people, so we just have one person. So I'm in charge of a $28.4 billion budget, a lot of money. It's good to have representation here. We were able to do a lot for the University of Florida, for Santa Fe. We did a lot for education in general, and it was a record year in that. So. And just to let you know, when I first got elected in 2010, we were coming off the housing crisis and the Great Recession. We had a budget of about $70 billion. Last year's budget was $117 billion, and we're expected to have $7 billion more on top of that this coming year. And that has a lot to do with the fact that Florida is growing, but it also has to do with more than just people moving here. What we've done every single year since I've been up there, we've had tax cuts, but those tax cuts have been real targeted tax cuts. So we've looked at it and say, how can you attract businesses to expand or grow in the state of Florida? And if you do that and you can attract them, then we'll have more money. So because of that, we've not only cut taxes about, if you add it up over, since I've been there for the 13 years, it's an aggregate amount, about 27 billion in tax cuts. We've also paid down the debt that the state has, so we're paying less in debt service every year, and we have record amount of funding for everything. So last year was a record funding for education, for the environment, for infrastructure. It was a pretty good year. So I got a breakdown of what funding in my committee, of what we are responsible for. I'll tell you what, term limits are really good and they're really bad. Last year's my first year chairing education approps. 2 years before that, I did civil and criminal justice appropriations. You just start learning the process, and then you're gone, and somebody else comes. So I like term limits. I voted for those back when we did those. I filed a bill a few years back to raise that to 12 years, let the citizens vote. It'd be a referendum on that. It didn't go anywhere. There was a lot of pushback on that, but really what we have now is you have staff and lobbyists who have too much power. Because you're new coming in, you're part-time, you're trying to learn, a budget that, well, I'm sorry, I said wrong. It was 26.6 billion last year, 41.7 billion if you take in local taxes and stuff. So So anyway, a couple things, I'll just go over a couple things that we did in my committee. We increased per student in the K through 12 education. We had a $389 per student increase, which is about a 4.75% increase. We had a pretty substantial bill in K through 12, which was called the Family Empowerment. And we can debate the merits of that bill or not, but that bill allowed every parent in the state of Florida, regardless of background, income, didn't make any difference, they could get a scholarship if they wanted to go to another alternative school, whether that was a charter school or a private school or whatever it was, homeschool even, under certain conditions, they would get money. So what we had to do is we had to, if you think about the influx, how many people were going to take advantage of that? So we put in we had an $802 million increase from the current year. There was $267 million for the workload, and we had $535 million to support the passage of that bill, which was HB1. And then we additionally, what I did is so we have the base budget, then we have, if you look at the bills, the budget that we pass every year, there's called back of the bill. I put an additional $350 million in the back of the bill as a reserve. We saw Arizona, I think, was the state that passed that same kind of program, and immediately they were out of money for these parents applying for this scholarship. And we didn't want that to happen, so we put that in. So far, it hadn't happened. Really, main reason is the private schools don't have the infrastructure to accept a lot of new students. They just don't have that. Now, will that change over time? It probably will. But for now, that wasn't so far this year. And what we've seen coming up and the enrollments that we've seen have not changed much. In the public schools, matter of fact, they're still in most schools are at capacity or over capacity of the regular public schools. So we haven't seen anything like that. We had $200 million increase in teacher salary over the base budget last year, which is $1 billion more than what we've had on teacher salary. You know, the goal, it's a little bit different today. Back when I was in school and you were in school, most of the teachers were women, and we had a lot of really talented teachers. Now, with the workforce opened up, my two daughters just graduated from university, one last year and one 4 years ago, and they look at opportunities in the corporate world, which are a lot, and so it's hard to compete to try to attract. So we don't just get the top-notch female teachers anymore. So what we had to do is we have to raise that base salary up. We did that to $47,500 as a starting base salary a year ago, and we've even increased that again now. We have with that extra $200 million, which equals $1 billion. We had $40 million. We have safe schools. Everybody's concerned about school safety. We had $40 million. We had a $20 million increase for a total of $160 million for mental health assistance. This is another really big topic that should have a lot of debate, and that is the mental health crisis that we're having. If you look at juvenile Baker Acts, they're just every year we're getting juveniles. Now, granted, sometimes you got to look at the Baker Act laws and make sure that those aren't being taken advantage of, that people just get frustrated. We have parents who get frustrated with their kids. We have other issues in Baker Act. Sometimes law enforcement is called in to kind of solve family problems. But to look at the real mental health issues that we have with youth, like if you see the trend lines, you're saying this is kind of untenable to have so many of that. So we've invested more money in that. We had money to recruit. We have a lack of the teachers that I'm talking about. So we retired military veterans and first responders that have retired that want to get in the teaching profession. We made that opportunity. $80 million for financial incentives to award for early education in K through 12 instructors who obtain their literacy, micro-credentialing, or reading credentials. So what we wanted to do is, we know that reading is probably a big issue with a lot of the youth, so we wanted to encourage teachers who are already teaching to go back and get these credentialing and micro-credentialing. So we put $80 million in the budget for that. We have no increases in higher education. We have not had any increases in the state of Florida since I've been up there for 13 years. Another debatable thing. It's great for kids that don't and families that can afford it, but at some point in time, you have to also look and say, how much does this state burden for a really top quality education, and how much should a student be responsible for? But for 13 years, there's been no increase in education tuition at any state colleges or any universities. So 100 million more for the college system. The universities, again, University of Florida did really well. Some of my colleagues complain that the University of Florida does so well in the budget process, but it's the flagship university. I can't use that name, flagship. My colleagues don't like that either, but it is. It's the #1 university. And as the University of Florida rises in its academic achievements, the whole state system rises. It really does. And we can't there's some states that have tried to make every university equal, and we've seen them equally mediocre in that. So making the university a flagship university, the top research university, continue to make it and fund it appropriately has been a priority of mine, and thankfully a priority of the legislation. So I was able, on a couple of personal notes, my #1 capital investment in project has been a new School of Music building. Anybody been to the university building, music building? Yeah, it's terrible. There's high schools with way better. It's built in the 70s, that architecture, open, concrete, humidity, just not a good thing at all. So I got $30 million last year, and the governor vetoed that. His was saying, look, the university has all these projects going. We need to finish some of the projects before you start new projects. I got back in, I got $35 million this year. And I went to the governor, and people with a lot of political acumen told me, you got to go in there and make a deal. You got to say, I don't know what deal I could make. I sat down with the governor and I said, look, this is my #1 priority. It's been my #1 priority for 6 years. I've been trying to get this done. I got it. I said, you could veto it or not veto it. I don't have anything to offer you. I'm not transactional. I said, I'm 64 years old. I'm not really that kind of person. He kind of chuckled, and I walked out thinking that was the stupidest thing to do or the smartest thing to do. But he kept it in the budget. We got $35 million. Now we're trying to figure out, we had some plans of 13th and University to make another bookend kind of building called some Hefner Hall. Don't think it's going to go there. Norman Field was a place for it, simply because we want to have about a 500-600 seat auditorium with it, and with a parking garage behind Norman Field was a place that was considered. Now it may go on where the band building is now. There's a place we could kind of add on to that band building and do that. So a couple other options, we're working on that, but the good thing is we finally got the funding. And I've told people that if you look at students that we're trying to attract, some of the students, they have music as a background. It may not be their major. They're engineering students. They want to go to med school. They want to do other things, but they have music in their background. And having this to attract the top students, having a world-class music building, I thought was important for the missing piece of the puzzle at the University of Florida. So I thankfully I was able to convince the appropriations chair, the Senate president, and then I got with the Speaker of the House. So we got that done, and I think it's going to be an incredible addition for the University of Florida. I got one other thing funded. I got a bunch of smaller things. I got a $10 million for music and elementary education, which is for just K through 2. I needed that about 80 million, but 10 million is a really good start. There's so much data out there of early childhood brain development that if we can incorporate music into their education model, it helps them with language, it helps them with math, it helps them with all kinds of things. So what I had done for 3 years, I had commissioned a study, and I got the funding done that the College of Education did. And that funding was for music, the impact of it, not just academically, but also socially. So it was a qualitative and quantitative study that the University of Florida was able to do. And to, again, not only show academic gains, but to kids who come in so far behind that typically never catch up. And we wanted to see if they would assimilate into a classroom. And so we had some really good results from that study that the university did. And because of that study that I commissioned, I was able to get the $10 million of funding. And I hope next year we're going to get more. And then the last thing, and I'll let y'all go, I got a big appropriations. It was crazy, $24 million. We're starting a new school in Gainesville. It's called the Florida School for Competitive Academics. It will be a residential program at some time. It'll be a 6th through 12th grade. And anybody heard of IMG Academy in Bradenton for sports? You ever heard of it? Okay, IMG Academy in Bradenton takes kids, top athletes from around the country. A lot of them live there, and they train them to be the best athletes. We're going to be the IMG Academy of Academics. And if you're going to play baseball at the University of Florida, go Gator boosters there in the dugout, you don't start in 10th grade. You start early. And so what we're going to do is we're going to recruit young kids, and we're going to have them who have an opportunity to be in the most competitive academic environment that you can have in the middle and high school. And I got to have a couple more pieces fall in place, but a lot of them aren't. If we do, I think we could be the #1 high school in the country within a year. We really could, by looking at the faculty that I'm trying to recruit and the students that we're going to recruit. We'll probably start out with about 400 kids. At the end of the day, we're going to have somewhere around 1,500 or 1,600 at the end of the day. And I tell people the importance of this is as why we compete. The University of Florida wants to compete with other universities around states in the Southeast. We're competing worldwide, and we are losing the science and technology and information race to other countries, China and India and other places. You don't want China to be the #1 place academically in the world. We can't do that. We have to maintain that. And the only way we maintain that is to build a system that starts young kids, and we build them an education model where they can compete. And it's pretty exciting. It was amazing I was able to get this done in the first year we tried to incorporate this. And again, if all the stars align, and I'm working that, we have our first Board of Trustees meeting tomorrow morning, looking at property and a building and stuff. Stay tuned. 1 year, maybe the #1 school in the country. Yes. Well, and just real quick on that, charter schools are public schools. They're part of the public education. They're not private. So, and yeah, they're part of the public school system. They are public schools. They're not private schools. They operate differently than a regular public school. But the thing is, I can tell you from a budget standpoint, I was in charge of that. The regular traditional public schools have record funding. Per student, per school, there are record funding. So there was no cuts to that. There was additional money that was invested. And by the way, I met a lady who has 4 kids in public school. Her middle boy in middle school was was straight A student. And next thing you know, he's withdrawn, he's failing, doesn't want to go to school. He's being bullied a lot. She moves him out into a charter school. Her other 3 in a regular public school. He excels. The next speaker was a lady whose son was a bully, and he was getting expelled out of schools and suspended on a regular basis. She moved him into a charter school, and he's excelling. And so what we're looking at is not this one size fits all. Some people, I had a brother and a sister. My dad was a professor at UF. I had a brother and sister graduate from UF. I had a brother, sister graduate from North Carolina. I barely made it through high school. And that was because I was in an environment with a lot of kids, kind of open thing, and I was not attuned enough and dedicated enough. So we need to look at the child and say what kind of opportunity we're going to give to individual children. We can talk about New College. I know y'all have another speaker here. I think New College, when I first found out about it, was ranked in the top 5 is what I was told in these it's 600 students. It was ranked top 5 out of 10. That was kind of a misinformation that I was told. Well, why mess with New College? It's top 5. Well, when there's only 10, you got to wonder what we're doing. New College, I can get into this. You talk about mental health issues. You know how many Baker Acts they've had at New College? They have 600 students. They've had a multitude. It's 18% of the students have had mental health crisis. That's a really, like I say, I could get into it, and I'd love to come back sometime and we can talk about your experiences, and y'all can help me, guide me as we kind of go through these things. But we have kids now, like I say, we have to be concerned. I'm part of the government. Schools are government-run institutions. How much trust do we put in any government institution at any level to do anything? And I think we need to be really open and unbiased about what we expect from any government institution, whether it's the legislature, whether it's a school board, whether it's a teacher, any government institution, we should really look really hard about what are they doing and making sure it's the right thing, and do a little investigation. And I'd love to learn from you on that. So I'm going to take my cookies to go because that's my dinner. And thanks for being in. I appreciate your, anytime you want me to come back, we can go over. There's lots of other things we're doing up in the state. So thank you.
I think we do need him to come back. Thank you very much. Okay, Ryan, come on up.
All right, everyone. Thank you very much, Senator Perry. That was a nice surprise. So we are going to be talking about how to effectively communicate with legislators like Senator Perry. So we'll see how long he sticks around for this. So advocacy is not a spectator sport. That's a quote from many people, but it was put into my head by my mentor, Bob Graham. Although this is my presentation here, a lot of this comes from what I learned from Governor Graham and from Sierra Club's fantastic lobbyist, David Collin, who is one of the smartest, most knowledgeable, and ethical people in Tallahassee. So, this quote here is kind of defines the Florida Springs Council's philosophy on advocacy. Polite conservationists leave no mark save the scars upon the earth that could have been prevented had they stood their ground. I think that's true. The other, development industries, farm industries, water users, utilities, they have no problem advocating for their positions. And a lot of time as environmentalists, we're expected to somehow to take the middle ground position, to not really go for what we believe is correct, and to always just accept that we're going to lose, that this state is going to continue to be developed and destroyed. We can no longer accept that, because accepting that is what's put us in the situation we're in today. So next slide. Oh, I have a clicker. Love a clicker. All right. So actually, Senator Perry touched on these, but one of the things that really infuriates me is when someone gets up and tells you, lobby or do this or do that, and doesn't tell you the challenges, because the challenges are why I have to be here. The challenges are why I have a job. The challenges are why we're losing, and folks like Senator Perry are winning. First of all, a 60-day legislative session. We have the same amount of, our legislature meets the same amount of time every year as the South Dakota legislature. Okay, that's because our legislature was designed when we were a small southern agricultural state, and we have not changed it now that we're the third largest state in the nation and second fastest. That means most things that you want to happen every year will never be considered, and only a few issues are going to rise to the top every session. Second is gerrymandering, right? We'll get to a map in a second, but our state senators are both Republican. One is Senator Perry and one is Senator Bradley. If you had real fair districts, that would not be the case. We would have a Democrat that elected this area. But because of the way that they've gerrymandered the districts, we are not given the choice to vote for people that have a chance of getting elected that represent our interests. That's a big challenge when it comes to lobbying. You're typically going to be dealing with someone like Senator Perry, who does not value protecting the environment or the other things that you value, which is what real lobbying is, right? For those you don't know, like Anna Eskamani is my favorite current Florida politician. She's out of Orlando area. There is no lobbying Anna Eskamani. She wants to do everything we want to do, right? You're collaborating with her. When you're lobbying, you're typically trying to get someone who doesn't agree with what you believe in to change their position or to at least not get in your way. Closed primaries. So we're actually talking about at dinner about ranked choice, right? Closed primaries are a major problem. I am no party affiliation. That means that I cannot vote in either side's primaries. Closed primaries tend to lead to extremists getting nominated, and then when you combine that with gerrymandering, you end up with extremists in office. Term limits. Senator Perry got this one right. While term limits seem like a good idea, they are the bane of good governance. The lobbyists and the staff people are the only ones who have any control in Tallahassee. So, I've only known one legislator in the 15 years I've been lobbying that actually understood Florida water policy. He was term limited out in 2018. No one else is going to learn. I literally, there is no one that I can have an intelligent conversation with in elected office in the Capitol on Florida water policy. That is a result of term limits. That's a problem. Money, right? The whole system is driven by money. I thought it was interesting that Senator Perry expected a transactional interaction with our governor. There's a reason he expects that, because politics in Tallahassee is transactional. Senator Perry may have, for that moment, escaped that transactional nature. I don't actually believe that. There will be a debt come due. There always is. And typically that transaction is in money, right? So you have to buy access to the legislators if you want easy access. The other way to do it is to either flood them with constituents or to be able to represent enough people that you potentially pose a threat to their reelection, but then refer to closed primaries and gerrymandering. Finally is the game of chairs, and Senator Perry kind of hit on this too. We have 160 elected legislators in Tallahassee. We have about 8 of them that have any say whatsoever, and 152 people waiting for their term. We're in a situation now where the Speaker of the House was chosen before he was elected. So the guy who is going to be the Speaker next year had never been elected to public office when he had already won the speakership. Right? How is it being determined? Well, how much money can you raise for me? Right? The most intense battles in the legislature are not between Republicans and Democrats anymore. They are between Republicans and Republicans, because only Republicans have any power in the building. So the most intense battles are over those leadership positions. Can Republican A or Republican B raise more money to get their preferred candidates elected to vote for them to become Senate President or Appropriations Chair, Senator Perry's case, Education Chair, whatever the position you want is? Because if you don't have that position, you really can do nothing. Right? So it's really important to understand who you're talking to and what they are actually capable of. Because if you're talking to someone on environmental issues who doesn't sit on an environmental committee, who doesn't have a leadership position, even if they agree with you, they're not going to buck their whole party. I mean, what did we just hear about, right? We heard about all of the appropriations that Senator Perry is bringing home. When you buck the party, what do you think gets cut? What do you think you lose, right? We have a few years ago, there was something called MCORS, right? This was the big proposal to develop all new highway systems across all of the Nature Coast and up through the Panhandle. Terrible idea, done largely to benefit large campaign donors. One of the least progressive ideas you could ever imagine. It passed the Senate 39-1. Every Democrat but one and every single Republican voted for this bill, right? Are they doing that because every one of them thinks, you know what we need? We need a lot more limited access highways going through our most pristine communities. I don't think so. I don't think anyone thinks that, right? They're doing it because they want to be able to come home and give speeches about the appropriations that they brought back for local issues. And they're not going to be able to get those appropriations if they buck the party on the big issues, right? That was the priority of the Senate President, Bill Galvano. Therefore, anyone who went against it, you were automatically at risk with any of your budget projects. So these are what we're up against. And this is why, I'm the only lobbyist in the state that works exclusively on Springs issues. I can't do it alone, right? We need an army of lobbyists. We need an army of people contacting Senator Perry, contacting the representatives, contacting Senator Bradley, and letting them know about whatever the issues are that are important to you. I'm going to talk about environmental issues because that's my hobby horse. But whatever your issue is, whether you care about education, whether you care about social justice issues, civil rights, abortion, whatever your issue is, what we're going to talk about today is the way to go about building those relationships. I'll go through this stuff real quick. These are just your local maps. There's District 6, the northern part, that's Senator Bradley. District 9, the lower part, is Senator Perry. Those are your House maps, 10, 22, and 21. So I gave this as in the handout. If you didn't get the handout, it's on the back table there, but it's got all of the legislators' contact information for all 3 districts, and it's got the website. If you don't know which district you're in, you go to the website, you put in your address, it'll tell you which district you're in. All right, so step 1 is finding your legislator. Y'all can do that. Step 2, establishing contact, right? So the first thing you need to do is set up the meeting. This is going to be a call or an email. I think calls are almost always best, especially for the purposes of setting up the meeting, right? Essentially, when you call, a legislative aide is going to answer. They're going to say, hello, how can I help you, right? You want to let the aide know that you're a constituent, that you're requesting a meeting, an in-person over Zoom, where you'd like that meeting to be, and the basic subject matter that you're going to cover, right? If you call, they should typically be able to schedule you on the spot in the next 7 to 10 days, depending on where the legislator is going to be. If you send an email and you don't get a response, it's really important to follow up on that email with a phone call and get a response. If you are a constituent, you should be able to get a meeting with your legislator. It would be, if a constituent reached out to an elected official multiple times and did not get a meeting, that would be something that I would be considering writing an op-ed to the Gainesville Sun or some other, calling a reporter or something like that. If there's one thing legislators are kind of required to do, it's meet with their constituents when they ask. I'm going to go quick since we're a little behind, but important thing there, 15 to 30 minutes is typical for a meeting, so you want to make sure that you have your meeting planned out. So preparing for your meeting, again, like I said, know your legislator, right? If your main issue is education, then you're in Senator Perry's district, that's an advantage, right? He's your constituent and he's the chair of the committee that can actually do something about that. If we all go to Senator Perry and say, Senator Perry, we really, really want to protect the springs. Well, Senator Perry is not on the Committee for Environmental Protection, not on the Appropriations Committee. What can you really expect him to do? He's probably not going to see the bill until it's up for a final vote on the floor. And at that point, there isn't really much that he can do. So, it's good to meet with people about everything, but if you really want them to do something, be cognizant of what their role is. You can go on their Senate webpage or their House webpage, see what their committees they're on, right? You're best trying to address an issue that is on one of their committees. And if they are the chair of that committee, then that is really the best. Know your legislator's position on the issue, right? So with Senator Perry has been one of the worst legislators in the state on growth management issues. He does not like growth management. He does not like comprehensive planning. He does not like trying to limit development, right? So going to Senator Perry to try to explain why we need stronger growth management laws is going to be a very hard lift. Senator Perry has in the past been supportive of springs issues, right? And you can look these things up and you can see his statements in the paper and news articles, right? So if you're trying to do something for the environment, you'd probably be better off approaching Senator Perry proactively about water quality and springs issues rather than trying to get him to change his kind of fundamental viewpoint on growth management and community planning. Know the legislation, know the issue. A big part here is no one has to be an expert, right? They are given so much advice by experts. There's no need for it. They have their own staff. They have committee staff. They have the regulated industries, lobbyists. They have all of the agency staff. They have do-gooders like me in their ear. They have so many people telling them, the details and arguing on the fine points. That's not your job as a constituent. Your job as a constituent is to express your position on an issue with the expectation that your position reflects the position of a lot of other constituents, right? So it's to show that you care, that you took the time out of your busy day to come and do it, that you have a passion, and that you have a basic understanding for the issue, right? You don't want to say things that are absurd, but no legislator is going to expect you to be the policy wonk. As Senator Perry said, they really don't even know the issues that they're governing, right, because of term limits. So it's not like you're going to walk in there with some wonk who knows everything about the issue, right? Assume you're probably on pretty even ground and just have a human conversation. But it is important to know what can be done, right, where we are in the process. So right now we're pre-session. No bills have been filed. This is a great time to reach out to your legislators to talk about things that you care about, that don't have to be tied to any specific bill. We need more springs funding. We need to put a springs protection zone on the Santa Fe River. We need to reduce consumptive use permits so we increase flow. We need to reduce urban fertilizer, whatever it is. This is a great time to kind of blue sky and talk to your legislators about the issues that are important in your communities. As we get further and further along in session, all of a sudden there's real bills, right? And if you're in the middle of session, you don't want to go to your legislator and talk about something that's not in a bill, because they can only deal with what's been filed in bills before them. So you want to make sure that whatever, that when you do know the timeline, know how the process works. So, typically in the run up to session, this is a great time right now, 3 months before session, to meet with your legislators, hear what they're thinking about issues, tell them what you care about, make your asks. And then as we get further and further to session, you have to tailor those down more and more to the realities of where we are, right? And then session ends and everything kind of resets, and we go back and you do it all over again. Define your ask. I've seen so many meetings where I accompany folks to do lobby meetings, and they go through the whole meeting and they don't actually have an ask. Like, they're afraid to actually say, and I want you to vote no on this. I want you to vote yes on this. I want you to give 100 million, right? You need to go in with a very defined ask for whatever it is you're looking for, and put the elected official on the spot to tell you yes or no. Right now, well, it's great meeting with you, and I'll have them put them on the spot. They'll say, well, I'll get back to you, but you need to have a defined ask to make your meeting worthwhile. And if enough of us have similar defined asks, eventually that will begin to pay off. And then build your team. A lot of times folks don't go into these meetings alone, right? It's great, especially if you're just beginning, to put together a little team of your friends to go in and do it. You can each kind of have your own area, right? This person's going to talk about the Itchitucknee. This person's going to talk about Santa Fe. This person's going to talk about fertilizer or septic tanks or whatever. Kind of have a run through. Have an idea of who's going to say what. You don't want it to be scripted, but you do want people to kind of know their role so that you make sure that you get through everything that there is to accomplish in the meeting. So now actually going to the meeting, right? You want to identify yourself. You want to start with a thank you. Although you are the constituents, you want to thank them for meeting you. You want to, you always want to be respectful, right? It's always important, no matter how much you disagree, to be respectful, because, even when they go low, we go high, right? And that's just kind of how it goes. Even when they're not respectful to us, we still need to be respectful to them. You want to make sure that you describe the bill, right? That you know the issue that you're there. Have the strong ask, share why you care about the policy, and then make yourself available in the future. And this is kind of the big thing that I learned from Governor Graham is, don't make these one-off interactions, right? You want to have this be a series of continuing interactions, which is why I always tell people, don't wait until session starts and the politicians are at their busiest to ask for a meeting. By that time, it gets hard. But if you've met with someone like Senator Perry 2 or 3 times, and then you need his ear during session, you're going to be much more likely to get on his calendar when it's busy if they know your name from previous meetings as a constituent, right? So Senator Graham used to love talking about the chiropractors. That was kind of his example of what the best lobbying group in the state was, because the chiropractic business was really determined, at least in the 80s, on chiropractors being covered under health insurance plans, which at the time was a state decision. Every single legislator in the state would be assigned their very own chiropractor. And this guy would call up starting in, March, April, and hey, how you doing? I'm a constituent. They probably sent in a small check to the last campaign. Talk about football, talk about fishing, talk about the Gators, talk about whatever it is, right? And then a month later, hey, just stopping by, bringing donuts, want to say hi to your office, right? And by the time they actually understood that they were dealing with a chiropractor who was lobbying them, they had had 5 or 6 visits from this person. And when they did that with every single legislator in the state, without really having a strong paid lobbyist corps, the chiropractors were the most effective lobbyists in the state. And it was really from this process of having someone assigned. So at League, you all are one of the few groups that could actually pull something like like this off, right? You all are statewide and you're big enough and you have folks in every district, unlike the Springs Council, where you all could have folks dedicated to every single legislator, 2 or 3 folks who were constantly once a month making phone calls, setting up meetings, stopping by the office and developing the relationships, right? Because those personal relationships, you're not going to overcome someone's political bias, but you can really win at the edges. And sometimes those edges are victory, the difference between winning and losing, is not getting someone to support your bill, but just getting someone to not kill it. And having that personal relationship sometimes can be enough that they'll let that go through, even if it isn't necessarily their priority. So really trying to build those relationships. And then consider thanking them publicly, especially, when you have a voice like the League. It goes a long way to, like inviting Senator Perry here. But if you have a meeting, I'm not saying you run to the press, but send an email, right? Share the email with a few folks. If it's a big meeting with some League folks, you could even take a picture and send it to some of the small local newspapers, right? But trying to give there to be some benefit to the elected official for meeting with you and trying again to build that goodwill. This isn't saying that you should donate to the campaigns of people you don't support or go volunteer for them, but it is about building the relationship on your issue, the issue that matters, most to you. And knowing the League's position on a lot of issues, right? Your issues probably aren't going to line up with a lot of the elected officials you need to reach across the board. But if you can find common ground on a couple, that's how we make progress in current Florida. Social media is another great way to go, right? Have someone snap a picture on the phone, just put a post on Facebook of you shaking hands with the legislator, share it with their office. It means a lot to them. It can help build those bridges. And then, when you see them, make sure you say hi. I've met Senator Perry a dozen times. He has no idea who I am, but you always go up, you always say hi, you always introduce yourself, right? You try continuously to build those connections because he deals with hundreds of people a day, right? So, but if you build it long enough, eventually, then you can become one of the trusted people that he'll go to on these issues. Not for your expertise, but to get the pulse of the community. Mary's talked to me 8 times about environmental issues, and we've got this bill. Wonder what the folks back home are thinking, right? If he's going to reach out to anyone, he'll reach out to the person he has the relationship with, not to, me who's constantly saying, do this, do this, do this, do this, right? I can't have personal relationships with every legislator. We are constantly suing the state, so they don't like me very much anyways. And that's why, we really need people who can go out and build those relationships one-on-one to try to bring these issues forward. Kind of next step. So we talked about this a little bit, but you have your individual legislator. That should be your focus. But as we said, not everyone matters. So if you care about environmental issues, which is my thing, so I'm going to talk about that, right? The chair of the Environmental Preservation Committee, even though he has one little district, he serves all of us. Right? He or she, it's actually she is in charge of environmental protection for the entire state and the Senate. So you can, I would not suggest trying to meet with random legislators that are not where you're not their constituent. The difference is committee chairs, Senate president. Leadership folks. Those folks are more or less in a statewide role. They have the single greatest say on what happens. So, you might not get a meeting with them in their district, but they're all, if you go up to Tallahassee to lobby with the League, if you go up to meet with your legislator, make sure you set up meetings with the committee chairs of whatever issue it is. If it's education, go talk to Senator Perry. If it's environment, go talk to Senator Rodriguez. If it's environmental appropriations, go talk to Senator Brodeur, right? But those chair positions, they really have control over what happens in the legislature. They don't have the power to get anything passed, but they have the power to keep anything from getting passed. They are the ultimate gatekeepers of the system. So if we want progress to happen, or if we want someone to stop more of the bad stuff from happening, it's really important to develop relationships with those committee chairs. So once you've kind of developed a relationship with your legislator, you've done that part, the next thing to do would be to look at the committee chairs. Look obviously at your county commissions, right? Our county commissions and city commissions have a lot to do with growth management locally and water resources. And then the water management districts. The water management districts makes all kinds of decisions. They're the most powerful agencies in the state that no one follows. They have enormous budgets. They control development and water use. And in Florida, if you control development and water use, you control the state. So getting engaged, the St. Johns River Water Management District takes everything south of Gainesville, that's down in Palatka. The Sewanee River Water Management District is the northern part of Alachua County, that's over in Live Oak. The meetings are available virtually. Those pound for pound, you can have more of an impact probably lobbying the water management districts and your local officials than you can at the state level. Not that the state level isn't important, but again, some of the barriers we see at the state level don't exist when it comes to districts and the local level. And then building pressure through organizing and activism, right? So the lobbying and the personal relationships is one part of it, but you really can't downplay the organizing and the people power. There's still, having a bunch of people show up to a protest, show up to an event, show up to a march, show up to any of those things. It's still how we best express that we are on the side of the majority of Floridians, right? We are never going to be able to match them when it comes to campaign finances or lobbyists. But when it comes to actual people power and churning people out, we can make a big difference, right? That MCORS toll roads program that I talked about earlier, we killed that. Even after everyone in the legislature said it can't be stopped and we're just going to give up and sell the state out for our local community center, the environmental groups stopped it. Sierra Club, Florida Springs Council, Conservancy of Southwest Florida, Florida Wildlife Federation, we stopped it. And we stopped it by churning hundreds of people out to Department of Transportation meetings. They'd never seen anything like it, right? You'd have 50, 60 trucks flying Trump flags, opposing a development, because we didn't draw these lines. We took everyone in. Everyone agrees that we don't want to build limited access highways through our rural communities. Everyone's seen what it does to rural communities. They've seen what it does to the waterways. They've seen what it does to the wildlife. It's a nonpartisan issue, right? The legislature was just on the wrong side of it. We never could have gotten that accomplished through lobbying, but through people power and organizing, we were able to kill that. Then they came back and said, okay, we won't do that. Now we're just going to build a turnpike extension. Well, we killed that. We killed it the same way, not by lobbying and lawsuits, but by organizing and people power. So, when I go to lobby, if they think I only represent me, I'm not going to get anywhere, right? But if they think that I'm representing 10,000, 50,000, 100,000 Floridians, or specifically a large portion of the people in their district, all of a sudden what I say has a lot more meaning than it would have if they think I'm just there by myself. Just 2 weeks ago, we churned out over 100 people here in Gainesville to an obscure DEP harm rule workshop. When they had the same workshop 18 months ago, 5 people came. So there's a huge difference to how the department's going to view us between 5 people showing up and the Alachua County Downtown Library having to bring in more chairs because we had exceeded the seating capacity, right? So showing up still matters. It always has, doing things as a group, especially if you're not comfortable with the one-on-one lobbying. Show up to everything you can, be in the crowd. Everything we do, we provide signs to speak, but just being a part of this is really important and sends a message to our legislators. So 2 things that you can do today. And these are also on the handout I gave you. So the Florida Springs Council is one of the first, if people are trying to copy us now, but one of the few environmental groups that has free memberships. We don't want money to be in the way of people getting involved, of lobbying and advocacy. We spend a lot of money on one of the best legislative advocacy systems. So we have one of those super fancy systems where if you go to floridaspringscouncil.org/informed member and you sign up, when I'm lobbying during session, we can send you emails where you put in your address and it automatically populates the number you need to call, what the bill's about, all the information, so that you can kind of do the things we've been talking about here without having to read and research every single bill that's going through the process, which is a full-time job. So floridaspringscouncil.org, informed membership. We just focus on springs and water and land conservation issues, but for that small niche, I think we do it the best, and we've generated over 20,000 emails to date from our little system. And people say, do emails and phone calls matter? Your individual email and phone call does not matter. But when we get enough of them, it actually does. I have had a state Senate aide call me and say, we're withdrawing the bill. Stop the phone calls. Because, they have one guy answering the phone. So if we get 1,000 phone calls in a day, what does that mean? They didn't get any calls from their industry lobbyists. They didn't get any calls from the folks that they want to get calls from, right? You can get 15,000 emails. It's an annoyance, but it shows something. So, it's one of those things where, I can't promise that every time you take action we'll win, but I promise every time you don't take action, we'll lose. I know that. That's guaranteed. So, it seems like a grain of sand, but you might be the grain of sand that topples the whole thing. So, informed membership, again, it's totally free. We don't get anything out of it, but it's really helpful to have as many folks as we can sending those phone calls, sending those emails, making those phone calls, supporting our mission. We have one of them up right now. 7 years ago, the legislature passed a law requiring the Department of Environmental Protection to pass a rule that protects outstanding Florida springs from harmful water withdrawals. For 7 years, the department has never proposed a valid rule. They have just completely ignored the law. You go to floridaSpringsCouncil.org/action alerts, and you can go and see what our email system is like. This one isn't going to politicians. In this case, the politicians did the right thing. They passed a good law. The agencies are refusing to adopt it, so these emails are all going to the Secretary of the Department of Water Protection, telling his agency to follow the law that was passed 7 years ago. So that's a great way to do some lobbying right now, today, tonight. That's open until Monday the 18th, that comment period. And then session starts early this year. Session starts in January. So you'll have your legislative delegation meetings coming up. Those are a great opportunity to speak to Senator Perry and all your other legislators, in person. We're going to have committee weeks, and then session is here. And session will be over 6 months from now, and, it'll have gone good or bad. You hear about all the money that's being passed around from Senator Perry. All of our springs are still just getting $50 million a year. So, when you think about $30 million for this building and $24 million for this building and $800 million for these private schools, all of our springs, all 30 outstanding Florida springs are splitting $50 million a year, right? So, if you want something to lobby to any politician you talk about, the Everglades gets $1 billion. I think our springs are just as important as the Everglades. So, more springs funding every year, if we're not going to regulate, then we better do some really good land conservation. And we need a lot of money to do that. And we need to support groups like Alachua Conservation Trust and other folks who are buying up the land before it can be developed. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions from anyone?
Thank you very much. I think everybody here wants to adopt you. I missed the very beginning because I was handling a petition out at the door. And please tell me your background.
Sure. I am the executive director of the Florida Springs Council. Prior to that, I was the president of 1,000 Friends of Florida. Prior to that, I had the great pleasure of working for Governor Bob Graham on environmental policy issues. And prior to that, I was in South Florida. So thank you all so much for having me. Yep. And I've got t-shirts and some glasses. If anybody wants to support FSC, please go on to our website. I'll hang out in the back if anybody wants to catch up one-on-one. Really appreciate everybody. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you all for coming. There are still some cookies over there.